Hi, I'm Amber Patrika, and I wanted to just talk about a little bit about the history of the gifted child. And to me, I wanted to start off with, before kind of diving into the history, why I think that gifted education is super important. I kind of typed it up in a Word document, but I thought I'd kind of read off and talk about some of those key points to you. Helping students learn and grow it's vital for all of us as educators. And we have to understand how to work with special populations and gifted students in general. We need expertise, we need information, and in order to be able to work with them, we first need to look at the history of the gifted child and where it's rooted, where it came from, where it's going to, as well as just being able to learn about why it's important. In gifted and talented education is the system by which districts like Manatee County recognize and serve this special population of children. There's been success with gifted education strategies like acceleration, compacting curriculum, grouping, pullouts, and a lot of this has came into mainstream education as well. And it definitely makes a difference, a meaningful difference for high ability students and having, that information. And a statistic I wanted to share also was that only 61% of classroom teachers have had any training in meeting the needs of the gifted. So it kind of goes back to the history, starting with, and I'm going to butcher his name, but William Torrey, I believe, Harris, the superintendent of public schools in St. Louis in the late 1800s, 1868. He instituted the earliest efforts to educate our gifted students. Then Francis Galton, his work, Hereditary Genius, came up in his study of over 400 British men throughout history, led him to conclude that there are statistical methods that intelligence was derived from heredity and natural selection. And that's still at the end of the 1800s. Then in 1901 in Massachusetts, the first special school for gifted children was opened. And in 1905, the French researchers Binet and Simon developed a series of tests, the Binet-Simon, to identify children of higher intelligence for the purpose of separating them from the normally functioning kids and placing them within these certain special classrooms, and revolutionizing psychological testing by capturing intelligence in just a single numerical outcome, aka number. In 1908, Henry Goddard, which here in Manatee County and here within Lakewood Ranch, there's a Goddard school, I know itself, preschool. They had studies in France with Binet and introduced Binet and Simon to measurement scales. And in 1916, Louis Terman, who is the father of the gifted education movement, published the Stanford Binet, Changing Intelligence Testing in America Forever. In 1917, then, it talked about how in World War I, the necessitates the mobilization of a large-scale army, the Army Alpha and Beta, looking at both academia and with the general public, how the Army was going to be using their soldiers as well, over millions of different recruits. In 1918, Lulu Stedman, she established an opportunity room for gifted students, that they would be able to go to this room and have proper training at the University of California. Louis Terman begins what has remained constantly the longest running study of gifted children, sampling 1,500 gifted students at the time in the 1920s. And then Letta Hollingsworth began some of these opportunity classes in New York as well. And Mr. Terman published Genetic Studies of Genius, talking about how gifted students were different in school, they're slightly better physically and emotionally in comparison to normal peers, superior in different academic subjects, And that was his first book in a 5-volume study spanning nearly 40 years. In 1926, Leta Hollingworth published Gifted Child, and it's the first textbook on gifted education, which is pretty amazing. Going into 1944, the GI Bill of Rights making a college education available to veterans from World War II who wouldn't otherwise have that opportunity to pursue higher education. And in 1950, the National Science Foundation provided federal support for research in math, physics, and engineering, which, kind of fast forwarding now, we have a lot of great STEM and STEAM programs within engineering in our schools. I know where I teach at McNeil, we have a phenomenal program on that. The National Association of the Gifted Children was founded in 1954 by Ann Isaacs. And of course, that was also the year the very well-known Brown versus the Board of Education ended the separate but equal education, which was huge and still remembered and talked about today. 1957, Sputnik was launched, sparking the United States to re-examine the quality of American schooling, especially in science and within math, technology, programming, bringing out the brightest and best. And then the National Defense Education Act in 1958 was also passed. And the Civil Rights Act passed shortly following that in the 1960s, emphasizing equal opportunities in education for students. In the 1970s, the House of the Gifted and Talented was housed within the U.S. Office of Education, was given its official status. And in the 1980s, the book A Nation at Risk reports scores of America's brightest students and their failure to compete with international counterparts, which was surprising when I actually was reading about that a little bit further. And it talked about policies and gifted education, promoting appropriate curriculum for gifted learners, and it was a very interesting read. 1988, Congress passed the Jacob Javits Gifted and Talented Students Education Act in elementary and secondary. And in the 1990, the National Research Centers of the Gifted and Talented are established in Connecticut, Virginia, Yale, and Georgia.